Farmers in a small section of Washington County were once the leading potato producers in the country and relied on the Champlain Canal to get their crop to market. This area, once known as the Swamp, was about 15 square miles of lake-bottom land along Wood Creek and the Old Canal from Dunham's Basin to Smith Basin in the town of Kingsbury. The Old Champlain Canal Days by James Ernest Daly. The most progressive, exciting, and romantic era of the Swamp was in the days of the old Champlain Canal prior to 1912, when the new barge canal went into operation. There were many more families in the Swamp at that time than today. As many as 30 pupils attended district school. Many of the boys in school were rough and aggressive, and one had to learn early in life how to defend himself, or he would have many black eyes and bloody noses, and also be considered a sissy. For the teacher, discipline was the major requirement. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, traffic on the canal was at its height. At that time, there were 6 combination store saloons between Smith's Basin and Dunham's Basin, a distance of 5 miles. With the area inhabitants, canal people, and the railroad workers, these establishments did a thriving business. Adjacent to some of these establishments were canal barns where the mules that towed the boats could be stabled and fed for the night. They were also used to keep fresh mules to replace mules that had worked many hours. But many times, the boats kept moving all night. When the canal boats docked for the night, the drivers would sleep in rooms over the saloons or in the barn with their mules. At the saloons, there would be drinking and card playing and many times fighting late into the night. I can remember when some of these places were in operation, and as a boy I was afraid to walk by as some of them were rough customers and thoroughly enjoyed teasing and threatening anyone who was timid or belonged to one of the better families. One time when I was about 10 years old, one of these men grabbed me and jumped in the canal with me in his arms. We went to the bottom of the canal and up again when he swam to the shore and put me on land again. I was sure I was going to drown and of course was scared half to death, to the great enjoyment of those watching. Until about 1910, all the boats were towed by mules or horses. During the last few years, some steam tugs were put into operation. 3 mules were used to tow a loaded boat. They were hitched in single files. The drivers were generally elderly and partially crippled. Most of them had a wooden leg or only one arm, probably the result of service in the Civil War. Many of them drove the mules during the boat season and stayed in the, quote, poorhouse during the winter months. When tired of walking, they would ride side-saddled on one of the mules. They usually had the best vocabulary and profanity that I have ever heard. When passing a saloon, they would run in and have a quick drink, then catch up with their mules. Most of them were, however, friendly to the children, and often gave us candy and gum. The boat captains, who generally owned their own boats, were quite respectable as a rule, but some of them could get pretty rough when meeting another canal boat, as the canal was narrow and it was quite a squeeze when 2 boats were abreast. A double header, as we called 2 boats lashed together, was steered by a wheel mounted on the boat in front. The wheel operated the rudder on the stern end of the rear boat. On a single boat, the rudder was operated by a long arm, or pole, on the stern behind the cabin, used for living quarters for the captain and his family. The cabins were cozy with bunks on the sides for sleeping. The old canal was very narrow in some places with sloping banks, so that when 2 loaded boats met, it was difficult to pass. The water in the channel was only 6 feet deep, and any boat that was loaded so heavily that it drew more than 6 feet of water was in trouble when passing, as it would ground on the sloping sides of the canal. When this happened, each captain would blame the other, and there would be swearing, arguing, and sometimes a good fight, until they somehow got by each other. When 2 tows of boats met one string of towing mules, they would stop. The towing line would settle to the bottom of the canal, and the other boat would float over the line. Then the driver would start his mules, take up the slack, and go on. When there was difficulty in passing, especially at night, one could hear the drivers and the captains arguing and cursing for hours.